Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror and sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now today, I will be welcoming back the multi-talented, chameleon-like character actor, Arye Gross. I had him on the show just before summer last year, and I'm having him back on the show today to talk about roles that we didn't get into last time, like The Couch Trip, Tequila Sunrise, The Experts, For the Boys, Hexed, and of course, he was on Ellen for a couple years, and he got out just before her controversial yet inspiring coming out of the closet happened. And I'm having him on the show today to talk about all that stuff. And Arye is a very smart, articulate man, and he's great to talk to. And I can't wait to talk to him again. So yeah, here is my new interview with Arye Gross. So last time we talked, we had talked about some great movie roles that you did, and there's plenty more that I'd like to get into, starting with The Couch Trip.
Uh-huh. Oh, wow. Okay, sure.
Yeah, that's a very underrated movie, I think. How did you get cast in that?
Well, I went in and read for Michael Ritchie,
Mm-hmm.
who, just for you probably know, directed so many great movies.
Yeah. The Candidate, Bad News Bears, Fletch.
Downhill Racer.
Yeah, Downhill Racer.
Yeah. It's funny. My daughter, who's 13, she and I watched Bad News Bears about 2 weeks ago. And
did she like it?
Really holds up.
Yeah.
That was hilarious.
I just interviewed one of the players on the team, David Pollock, who plays Rudy Stein.
Oh, so which one is he?
He's the curly-haired kid with the glasses.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, such a fun movie.
It is.
And Walter Matthau, of course. I guess done a few movies with Michael Ritchie.
Yeah.
So what can I tell you? I auditioned for the movie, and I had it was really one of the first jobs I got after Soul Man.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Ritchie was just great. I actually have tons of stories about it. That's the truth.
Go ahead.
Because I wound up the movies that I had done before. A Soul Man had, it was like, it was a college comedy. And I mean, it had, other elements to it. But, most of the characters were kind of around my age. And then House 2 was a totally different thing, but it was, it was a much more independent feeling kind of thing. Couch Trip had gigantic stars in it. It had stars in it, and it had people who I just had idolized for years.
Right.
So Walter Matthau, Dan Aykroyd, Charles Grodin, and David Clennon. There's so many great people in the movie. Mary Gross,
Richard Romanus.
Richard Romanus. What a great guy.
Yeah.
Jeez.
I interviewed his brother Robert recently.
Yeah, right. Who was in Batman?
Yes, Fast Times.
Yeah.
Foxes, a lot of good movies he's in.
Yeah. And everything about Couch Trip was sort of like opulent. We always shot in like these beautiful sets and beautiful locations. And, they had this, really big costume budget and stuff like that. So, instead of trying on a suit that they had pulled out of, gotten like from a costume warehouse, it was the first time, where they, like, somebody would, take your measurements and then you go in and like get a suit a couple of days later that they made for you.
Yeah.
For the movie. And Walter Matthau was just my absolute hero, and like my hero through like the whole movie. He was just, he was hilarious. I to this day, I've never seen anybody who was more like free in their comedy and what they had to say. And it's not like he didn't care what people thought, but he was very, he was outspoken, and he was Walter Matthau. He could.
He could be a curmudgeon.
He could be a curmudgeon, but he was actually like an extremely. He was an extremely kind guy, but he was, and just funny as hell.
Yeah.
When we were, he was playing that sort of loopy priest in the movie, and or disguised as a priest, and I guess in the story he's a friend of Dan Aykroyd's from the psychiatric institution, and we were shooting one day in Beverly Hills, and it was, and I think Matthau had, asked where there was a bathroom, and the production said, "Oh, well, where we're set up with the trailers and everything is, some distance away. So, can we just get this next shot, and then when we finish this bit, we'll have somebody come pick you up in the van and drive you 6 blocks away so that you can use one in the trailer or something." and Matthau was like, "I've got a better idea." And he kind of, jaywalks across the street, and there's a bank that's just closed a couple of minutes ago. And he knocks on the door of the bank, and somebody comes to the door, and we watch him across the street as there's like a conversation through the glass, and then like Matthau turns and like looks at us with this like silly grin, and then somebody inside the bank opens the door, and Matthau disappears. Like, there's nobody else who would be allowed into a closed bank after hours.
Yeah.
But Walter Matthau in costume shooting a movie at the news bathroom.
Wow.
So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and Dan Aykroyd, he had just finished Dragnet, and I heard he didn't want to do this movie at first because he had just worked on that movie. And if you look, he actually has a little bit of his haircut from Dragnet in this movie too.
The funny thing about Dragnet is that, like, I don't think I was, I wasn't, I didn't know much about it when we started shooting. So I didn't know that he had just finished that, but I did hear a story during that period that a producer named David Permit.
Mm-hmm.
That his, like, famously, I hope it's not just apocryphal, but famously, his pitch for the movie, did you ever hear what it was?
No.
Okay, so he came up with the idea, and this is how he sold it to whoever was out of the studio at the moment.
Orion.
It was, right, it was, dum-da-dum-dum, Dan Aykroyd. That was it.
Wow.
And then on that, they were like, okay, great idea. We're doing it.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. And then you did Tequila Sunrise.
I did. I think Tequila Sunrise was, she said,
Robert Town.
I thought I think that was earlier, but yeah, Tequila Sunrise, I did right after I did The Experts.
Mm-hmm.
And, right, that was Robert Town and, Michelle Pfeiffer and Kurt Russell and Julia, Mel Gibson.
Raul Julia.
Yeah. I was originally set to work about 5 days on that movie.
Mm-hmm.
And it got extended. It got extended quite a bit. But that was another movie where suddenly I was working with the people. The people I was on the set with were these giant stars. The first thing in the movie on Tequila Sunrise,
mm-hmm.
The entire first day was a shot early on in the movie. Mel Gibson and I are in a car in the LA River. And what's sort of been set up is that I'm his lawyer, and he's hired me as his lawyer because I'm also the lawyer for the restaurant. And know Michelle Pfeiffer, her character, and he has a thing for her, and he wants this connection.
Right.
And the backstory is that my lawyer character had I think her name was like Sandy Leonard or something like that. Had a client who owed me money, and but instead of paying me cash, had given me narcotics. Like, had given me cocaine or something. And so I went to Mel Gibson, who used to be, a drug boss, but had gotten out. And I tell him, you got to help me sell this, or they're gonna like kill me.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to figure out how to sell it. So he helps me. So he's going to help me do this drug deal. And I know, I'm just a guy who's a young lawyer, and I know nothing about it.
Mm-hmm.
Not a career drug criminal. And so the first day of production, we're sitting in this car, and most of the day it's like helicopter shots of the LA River that then like fly over us and past the car. And so we're in this car together for like 10 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I am so like self-conscious about like it's Mel Gibson, it's 1987 or something like that. It's one of the biggest stars in the world, and I don't want to like hassle him. I don't want to make him hate being in the car with me, and I can't think of anything to say. that's not going to sound stupid. And so he says, so we were in the car, and probably for like 2 hours, like not a word was spoken. But various people would come over, and makeup people would do touch-ups, and like we're sitting in a car, and there's a helicopter flying over, and occasionally like the director of photography comes by, checks light or something that's been set up in the car so that they might catch a little bit of us, but we both sort of know that like they're not really going to see much of us from a helicopter that's flying over. And also on that first day, and for the first few days, the director of photography was Yost Vacano, who was the DP on Das Boot.
Oh yeah.
And then shortly after production started, he left, and Conrad Hall, took over, and wound up doing like just such a beautiful job. I think he was nominated for an Oscar for his for the cinematography. But I guess I was like 27 years old. I really started working consistently maybe 2 years ago, 2 years before that, and Mel Gibson says, just to break the ice. So what do you do? What do you do besides acting? And I was like, acting's all I do. I don't have to do anything else. It's just, I'm a full-time actor. And he was like, oh, okay. And then I said, do you do other stuff, or did you do other stuff? And he goes, I have a ranch, I raise some cows. And then he started talking about, like, about his ranch and, what kind of grass that he fed his cows so that it would, you get a different kind of beef when you feed, when your cows are grazing on clover as opposed to something else, and it's like, I just felt like, oh, right, I'm an idiot. He wasn't asking me if I was really an actor. He was asking me, like, what else I was interested in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And then I will not go into details, but the big icebreaker was when he asked me to share with him the most disgusting story I'd ever heard. And so I did. I told him the most disgusting story I'd ever heard.
Yeah.
And then he said, that's nothing. And then he told me what has now become the most disgusting story I still have ever heard. It had to do with Mad Max. And anyway, I had a pretty good time on that.
Wow, never a dull moment.
No, not at all. And then also to be like you have to do a scene with Michelle Pfeiffer, hang out in that in the makeup trailer during these long hours waiting to work, and Kurt Russell coming in and telling stories, and it was great.
Oh, that's awesome. You mentioned before about The Experts. Yeah, I remember seeing that movie on HBO like every other day back in the 90s. What went wrong with that movie? Because I heard it was shelved for a long time.
Oh, so there were a few things. Mm-hmm. One is there were big changes at the studio Paramount, mid-shoot, and it kind of went from being somebody who was the head of the studio was somebody who was a big fan of John Travolta's and thought this was going to be a big movie.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they thought it was like important enough that the cinematographer was Ronnie Taylor, who, unless I'm getting this wrong, I'd look it up right now, but he was like, he was the director of photography on Gandhi.
Mm-hmm.
They had imagined this as, it was a comedy, but it was going to be like their big movie. And Dave Thomas from SCTV was directing it, and he was hilarious. It all seemed great. The script was goofy, but it was based on. It had originally been based on the original script was essentially the same story, but instead of the Russian town being sort of locked in the 1950s Andy Griffith kind of mode, it was that, and that they had to like catch up to modern 80s America, which sounds so silly to say right now, but it was a city that was supposed to be made to look like the U.S. so that spies could train for deep cover life. But they brought some equipment in from New York for authenticity in the story, and they'd gotten cockroaches for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't know how to get rid of the cockroaches, so they kidnapped a couple of guys from New York who were exterminators, who think they're being taken to some, other small city, and then discover that they're actually in Russia in like a spy town. And then somehow that seemed too dark, and they decided, they would make it, they'd sort of brighten up the story and make it, these guys who, were kind of, nightclub hipsters.
Mm-hmm.
And, but about halfway through shooting the movie, somebody else became the head of Paramount. And from what I understood, this was a person who, like, specifically did not care for John Travolta. And so the film sort of became like a little bit, it was like a personal thing. And there was, it was and even on set, we'd hear stuff that, there was a new executive put in charge of the production, and we'd hear that, he was in the hotel gym, on an exercise bicycle, and sort of bad-mouthing the movie, just to somebody he thought was like a random hotel guest. And so there was this very weird, uncomfortable feeling while we were shooting the film. And then after the film was completed, some months later we went back to do additional shoot. We changed the ending, additional shooting on the movie. And by the time the thing was getting ready to be released, there was great changes in the Soviet Union and glasnost and perestroika, and suddenly the Cold War was ending, and the movie was starting to feel like it was particularly old news.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it's not like I was, in the loop on everything that was going on. I just, I knew the movie was coming out.
Right.
And I got asked to go on a sort of publicity tour to Texas, of all places, with John Travolta, and John Travolta was flying his plane, and it was like, so you'll go with John and Kelly Preston, and you'll go on his plane to Texas, and you'll go to a couple different cities in Texas and do, promotional events. And we did those for a few days, and I ended up I was in Houston, and it was our last place to do an event. And John and Kelly took off, and somebody from the studio publicist was like, well, listen, we'd love to have you for the opening here in Houston of the movie. And, we'll give you a hotel room and, for a few days, you'll have a driver. So I decided to stay, and hung out for a day in Houston. It was great. And then the next day was the big opening in Houston, Texas, at this one movie theater. And there was a limo driver who had taken me around the previous day. We went to NASA. It was all great. And about a half hour before the movie is supposed to have its first screening, we drive to the theater, and it's a theater that's like in the middle of, it's like a Cineplex. It's in the middle of the parking lot at a big shopping mall in Houston. Mm-hmm. And we drive up, and there's surprisingly few cars in the parking lot. Mm-hmm. And there's like nobody outside the theater. And so we pulled up, and I said, are you sure this is the place, this is for the opening? Mm-hmm. And he said, yeah, this is it. And this is actually the only place it's playing. So I got out of the car, and I go to this kind of empty theater and say, hey, I don't know, maybe we're late, but is the Experts opening here tonight? And they're like, yeah. And I said, well, my name's Arye Gross. I'm in the movie. I could probably have a ticket set aside. And they go, yeah, we got a ticket for you. And I said, I realize it might be packed. Is there any way to get another person in there? And they kind of like look at each other, and they go, we could probably squeeze one more person in. Mm-hmm. And I said, great, I want to get a ticket for the driver. I'll pay for it. And they're like, no, we'll just give you another ticket. And I was like, oh, that's great. And there's a guy who like sit in the car the whole time, and you can see this movie. And I go to the car, and I go, hey, look, if you want to see the movie, I got you a ticket. And he's like, oh, that's fantastic. And we walk into the movie theater, and there were like 6 people in there. Mm-hmm. And I walked back out and said, is it playing in another theater? I mean, I've gone to screenings before that like we're like doing stuff like radio stations where they were giving away tickets, if you called in.
Oh, yeah.
The opening.
Yeah.
And we went in, and they're like, no, that's the one theater that's flying in. And so we watched this movie, and there were like, I think there were like 6 people, probably 10 minutes into the movie. 2 of them like gave up, and they walked out of the theater. And then, and the guy who was my driver was like, 10 times during the movie, he's like, oh, you turned your head. You're going to walk right into that girl with those little books and knock them over, aren't you? It's like, yeah. And then like a second later, it would happen. I knew that was going to happen. And it was the weirdest thing I'd ever experienced. It was not a super good feeling. And then and the next day I flew back to LA and found out that Paramount, for some reason, I guess because they had some obligation to release it somewhere, released it for 7 days in Texas and Oklahoma only.
Mm-hmm.
And then that was it. And that was the last I heard of it for at least a decade, and then it started showing up playing on things like HBO. I actually have here on my desk
Mm-hmm.
a beer sign that I use as sort of a pencil holder. It was a gift from Dave Thomas.
Yep.
It says, "I survived the experts, Paramount Pictures, Vancouver, DC, 1987.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
How was Dave Thomas as a director?
Dave Thomas was hilarious.
Yeah. One of the funniest guys there is.
And James Keach, who was in the movie, was also the producer.
Right.
And so the movie was scripted and heavily plotted out. And Dave Thomas also knew that sometimes it just sort of sit there, so he didn't encourage improvisation.
Mm-hmm.
And so very, very quickly in the course of the movie, I started feeling like we'd done a couple of scenes, and I felt like, I feel like there was a piece of information that we wound up never giving
Mm-hmm.
in a particular scene. So I sort of made a point in my scenes with John when I was like learning my lines the night before to like try and figure out what actually had to be said, or some plot point. Not that I was like a master filmmaker or anything, but as far as I understood it, and then we would, I'd know my lines. We'd go to the set, we'd rehearse, and Dave Thomas, and or John would say, "Hey, we should loosen this up a little bit," and we'd sort of improvise something, and we'd get something we said, and then I would kind of sort of like throw a flag on the plane, go, "I just want to say, I think we have to mention that we need to buy clothes during the scene, because the next thing is we're buying clothes. And is there a way to work it in?" And that sort of was like shooting a movie. There was also there was also the sort of budding, the romance between John Travolta and Kelly Preston. Like, it happened during the shooting that movie. You can sort of see it on screen. They were like, they really sort of were actually falling in love with each other.
Yeah. I'm surprised that marriage has lasted a long time, but it has, and that's great.
Yeah.
How about working on For the Boys?
So I had a really wonderful experience on For the Boys. I had just done a movie called A Midnight Clear,
Mm-hmm.
which was World War II movie,
Right.
and it was sort of it was slightly coincidental that For the Boys, which spans decades, big studio movie that wound up it became very hard for Midnight Clear to get their hands on authentic or challenging anyway, to get their hands on authentic World War II uniforms
Yeah.
and props, because basically 20th Century Fox had kind of, rented everything for the World War II stuff and for the boys. And but right after finishing A Midnight Clear, For the Boys had already been shooting for a while, and I was really there for the last segment of it, when we shot all the. So, for those who don't know, For the Boys follows the lives of these. Bette Midler and James Caan are this sort of musical, very famous act, and the singer, and he's a band leader.
Mm-hmm.
And the sort of wraparound.
The burlesque days, right?
And they hated each other for years, and I work for the producer of the event, and I'm sent over to her apartment because she hasn't shown up, and she's quite elderly, and she's not going to go. And I spend the afternoon with her. She tells me the story that winds up being the story that you see in the movie, and it keeps back to us, and she'll tell me what happened in during World War II, and
yeah,
and you'll see it, and then come back to us in her apartment, and I'll go, oh wow, that's amazing, what happened then? And then then we'll hear about the 1950s,
mm-hmm.
and that again, that was a thing where I went in and I auditioned for the director, Mark Rydell.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful actor and director.
Actor studio guy. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And accomplished pianist.
Mm-hmm.
In her apartment, in the Bette Midler's character's apartment, there's a piano, and when they would be redoing the lighting for a different scene, Mark Rydell would sit down at the piano and play jazz for 20 minutes while people were working. It was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the kind of director who we would be shooting a sequence where when we were shooting the piece where she has just told me about her experience during the Vietnam War. She'd done a USO show, and there's an attack on the base, and her son, who's in the service at that base, winds up getting killed during the Viet Cong attack at the base.
Mm-hmm.
They'd shot that, weeks and weeks earlier, and so when we went to start rehearsing the scene that immediately follows that sequence, Mark Rydell drove me over to the editorial building, and I watched 20 minutes of cut footage of the Vietnam sequence, because it was I want you to have this visually in your head, so that when we come to you, you feel the import of what she's just told you. And that's just not that's not an everyday thing you get as an actor. There's a kind of generosity about it that is really amazing and unforgettable.
Yeah. Did you know that when the movie came out, Martha Ray felt that it was an autobiography about her own career and that she was offended by that?
Yeah, I didn't know. I'd actually heard that,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd heard stories that it specifically was about her. But that that it's just it was a kind of controversy that I didn't have any particular there was nobody in my world who had any insight into it, who knew anything about it. If there was, it was not something that landed with me in any particular way. And I still have no idea what her objections to it might have been. If it's really true that it was based on her life, it was just coincidental, or if it was based on her life, if she wasn't properly credited or compensated or something. Actually, don't really know the story there. I do know that when the movie came out, it got an extremely lukewarm reception and was not around particularly long.
Yeah.
In the theaters. As a matter of fact, I was in Texas shooting the movie Hexed.
Yeah.
When it opened, and there was a big opening there for the movie. Remember, Governor Ann Richards was there, and I got to meet her, which was pretty cool. And I brought Adrian Shelley with me, who was also in Hacks.
Yeah.
That's my sort of, I had an extra ticket to the opening, and then watched the movie, and there was something so it was very anticlimactic. I thought it was going to be this really big movie, and then we watched it, and at the end of it, it was just kind of well, have an early call tomorrow, probably. So we should go back, get some sleep. And, unfortunately, there was another thing where I had a great time working on the movie, but there wasn't much, it's hard. It's hard for people it's hard to make a good movie that, the people,
That it can be a massive
you have all these elements there, and still,
Yeah. Marketing also
not really respond to it.
And marketing plays a big deal into it too.
Yeah.
I mean, Hexed, I know that movie was controversial, and it had a lot of politically incorrect comedy in it, right?
I mean, it was Alan Spencer, who's the writer director. He was in that. He'd done that show Sledgehammer,
Right.
with David Rasche, and he'd sort of been, for a time, sort of a protege of Mel Brooks, and so I guess I think I think most good comedy is basically subversive and talks about things that you're not supposed to talk about.
Right.
Like companies. So I just, my problem with Hacks ultimately was that I just didn't. It felt like it wasn't very well. It felt like it wasn't very well made. Um, and I tell you, my very favorite moment in the movie is Michael Knight, who played sort of my nemesis in the movie, the other, like, hotel desk clerk. He was a really good-looking guy.
Yeah, he was in date.
Always looked at.
He was in date with an angel, and then
That's right.
Yeah.
There's a scene that takes place in my character's apartment, and he's sent by the manager of the hotel or something to come and find me. And he comes into my apartment, and in the apartment that we were using, right as soon as you come to the front door, there's a wall of bookcases and books. And as he walked in, it was a kind of a flat shot. The director said, just, ask Michael to just like improvise something as he came in. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, it was just take after take as Michael would, like, mutter something. He had to say something derogatory about my apartment because he hated me so much. Mm-hmm. And what he finally landed on, and had to do it a few times because we all couldn't, because it just made everybody laugh. We had to have a clean take.
Yeah.
He'd walk in the apartment, sort of size up where I lived, and then looks at this bookcase and just goes, books.
Oh my God!
Like books are the most like sign. What an idiot!
Yeah,
and it's hilarious.
Yeah, Alan Spencer's a funny guy.
One of the funniest guys like that.
Yeah, I've listened to his DVD commentaries for Sledgehammer, and he is just drop dead hilarious. And
yeah.
I reached out to him for an interview recently, and he didn't respond, but he sent me a friend request on Facebook. And I've seen him post really funny stuff every day.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Are you talking about Michael Knight or Alan Spencer?
Oh, Alan Spencer.
Oh, Alan Spencer, yeah.
Yeah. How did you get on Ellen?
Well, so I had the people who created the show, which was originally titled These Friends of Mine, were Carol Black and Neil Marlin.
Who did Wonder Years.
Who did Wonder Years and Growing Pains. But they'd also, Carol wrote Soul Man, right. And Neil was one of the producers. Mm-hmm. And so I met them when I was cast in Soul Man, and then we actually became very good friends for a few years, and then I even at the very beginning recorded a couple of episodes of Kevin's voiceover for Wonder Years when it first started.
Right.
But they wound up. I wound up being replaced by Daniel Stern, mm-hmm. Who wound up being the voice of older Kevin, mm-hmm. For the duration of the series. But it was, I'm not entirely sure still exactly what went down, because I had thought I was going to be doing, all of them.
Right.
But there was somebody at the network who preferred Daniel Stern after he had heard my older Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, so my friendship with Carol and Neil survived that. And a few years later, they called me and said that they had that they had a sitcom pilot that they wanted to do called These Friends of Mine.
Mm-hmm.
That essentially was like a sort of gender reverse Seinfeld.
Right.
So there was like a female comic at the center with two female friends and one male friend.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the male friend. So I went over to their offices one day and we did a read through the script, and I think they kind of had a sort of carte blanche, with the network at the time.
Right.
And the next thing I heard was like, so they're offering me the stuff, and at the time I was the business was like slightly different back then, and there were a lot of people who had kind of advised me, like, don't do TV because you won't be able to do films again.
Right.
And I really don't think that that's like the case now by any means, but back then it still seemed to exist a little bit, and I had consequently been kind of reluctant to do any television. And before Soul Man, I had done a couple of episodes of a couple of shows.
Mm-hmm.
But after Soul Man, and suddenly I had sort of, made a name for myself, for lack of a better word. I got offered TV stuff, but I was always told, you really, if you want to keep working in films, you have to say no. And it was right around that time when there was a movie that I really wanted to do. I won't even go into details, and thought that I had a shot, but it wound up going to an actor who had done a TV series that I had passed on. I hadn't passed on the offer. I passed on even being considered for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to make too much of it, but when that happened, and I realized, oh wow, this guy who's known for this TV show just got this big movie.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe things had sort of changed, and so I said yes, and I did. And I did do the pilot for These Friends of Mine, and then all of a sudden we were, we got picked up, for 9 episodes, I think it was. And had a pretty fun time doing the first bit of it.
Mm-hmm.
But, it wound up being kind of challenging. A lot of it was super fun.
Mm-hmm.
And we all got along, but there were also, there were all kinds of tension.
Yeah.
That show, I guess it's, when such big stakes, with such big money stakes, there's, it can make working conditions, not all the time, but it can make working conditions super tense, and it can change people with the pressures to, you know, perform or make it, or be perceived as, you know, number one, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And the show quickly lost the feeling.
Yeah.
I'll just tell you that Ellen and Carol and Neil, who were the original producers, wound up, after a half dozen episodes, in a kind of power struggle. And I'm not going to say who was right or wrong.
Yeah.
But Ellen wound up prevailing, and the show went from being called These Friends of Mine to Ellen, and Carol and Neil, who had created it and were writing it and kind of overseeing it, were no longer around. I think they still owned it, or owned their, you know, piece of it, but they were no longer as, you know, involved in the sort of daily on-set, you know, production of the show.
Right.
And it very quickly lost any sort of feeling of being an ensemble. And, you know, 2 years later, by the time I was fired from the show, I was the last person who had been there, other than Ellen, when we did the pilot.
Oh, that's terrible.
I mean, cast, crew, producers, writers, you know, it was a totally different thing by the time I left.
Yeah, well, you got out at the right time, because once, you know, she made the announcement she was coming out on the show, you know, the media did what I think this set the tone for the present, in which, you know, they took nothing and made it into something, you know.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess I had kind of such a bad I such a bad feeling about the show and her and how it all went down, that I just, you know, if I heard mention of the show and what was going on with it, I would just, you know, I would change the channel, you know, I would switch to another radio station, or I would change the conversation. Just did not want to talk about it. It was an unpleasant experience for me.
I'm so sorry about that. I'm sorry for
I mean, it was still like, you know, it's not like, you know, I got robbed and my house was flooded and then somebody shot me.
Oh.
It was no pleasant experience. You know what I mean?
I didn't know that.
Yeah. No, what I'm saying is that, like,
oh, okay.
I appreciate that, but it was like, you know, it was, in terms of problems people have in their lives, it wasn't that severe.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
But I definitely felt like it sort of derailed me, like, acting career-wise after that. That was a little tough for a couple of years, but
yeah.
And there was this perception out there that I had. There was a widespread perception that I had quit, and I think that was put out there by somebody, but that wasn't the case at all. And it's funny because, you know, very often on, like, you'll hear about a show that's been on the air for a couple of years and it's kind of a hit, and then you'll hear that an actor is leaving because they're going off to pursue a film career or something.
Yeah.
And very often that's accompanied by a sort of murmur from the crowd going, "Oh, really? You're too good for this show and you're going to do movies now? What are you, an idiot?" And I've heard that time and time again with actors, and thought sort of poorly of them for their, you know, questionable choices. And then to like discover, oh wow, I got fired by these people and told that I'm not supposed to talk about it as part of my, like, severance package.
Yeah.
And then like hearing in the media, like, oh yeah, he went off to pursue other things. He didn't like the direction of the show or something like that.
Yeah. I know Dave Thomas, he was on Grace Under Fire, and he wanted to leave after the pilot. He said that Brett Butler was such a diva, but he wrote it out for 5 years, and he saw her just get progressively worse because fame really affected her,
Yeah.
It's sad.
I think there are certain people, I have a theory about this. And, so because, she's not the only person we've heard this kind of thing about, right?
Of course.
And I think you have people who are, comics or actors, and, they work like hell to, develop an act or an acting resume, and, it's not easy. People don't just fall into it. Somebody doesn't just accidentally get a TV show.
Right.
They work really hard, but there's a way in which, if you're a, network executive and you've got a TV show, and there are 50 other TV shows, and you want to make sure that people tune in. You pick somebody or a couple of people, and there are exceptions to this. It's not like there was one person on Friends who everybody tuned in for. It was the ensemble, and that was sort of, what was magic about it. And same thing with Seinfeld.
Right.
But there were all these other shows, and you were supposed to, everybody's supposed to, tune in to find out what's going to happen with this one person that week. And that one person becomes, in a way, the only person with value to the network in the room. And that person gets paid a lot, and they get a lot of media attention, and so there's a lot of perks that come with it. But there's also, I think, this personal pressure that also the show lives and dies on whether or not they are liked.
Yeah.
And I don't think that hearing that and experiencing that, somebody says, oh, okay, well, that just totally makes me feel mellow, and I'll just relax now. Instead, people go, oh, it's all on me. And so I'm going to try and control everything that I can. And if something gets out of control, it's all going to be my fault. Mm-hmm. And I think it drives people, I'm not saying in like a medically diagnostic way, but I think it drives people a little crazy. Mm-hmm. And sometimes their behavior can reflect that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Trying to be sort of diplomatic, partly because we've heard about a lot of bad behavior, but I don't think they're necessarily bad people. I think that they wind up getting into a kind of stressful situation that most people never experience. Most people don't get really good at their job and wind up being told that they're responsible for the, hundreds of millions of dollars of fortune that's going to go one way or another for, a gigantic media company. And that it's on them.
Mm-hmm. Totally agreed there.
So,
yeah. Do you have a Timelock story?
So Robert Munich is one of my favorite people in the world. And he had written and directed this beautiful little movie, and I had met him, I think, to meet him and maybe audition for another movie he was doing. He was trying to get the financing for, and it didn't quite come together. And then we kind of stayed in touch, and then maybe a year later, he called me and said, "Hey, so will you do me a favor? I just got this job. These producers are doing 3 movies on the same set. They're all 3 like science fiction movies, and each one shoots for like 3 weeks. There's like 12-day schedule or 15-day schedule for each movie, and I'm doing one of them, and it's sort of terrible." And they all have like this same. I think Jeff Speakman. I think it was all 3 of them. But they were selling them all on his thing as a sort of action, action hero. And he kind of said, "The movie's kind of terrible, but I think we'll have fun doing it." And so I wasn't doing anything. I was like, "Yeah, sure." It was like 10 minutes from my house, and then Jeffrey Meek, who played the bad guy, or one of the bad guys in that movie, we'd both gone to UC Irvine and had all these mutual friends. So we became really good friends doing that movie. He was the guy, who did Raven.
Yeah.
But it was like, and then the other sort of funny thing was that Marianne Dabo,
her sister was on the Wonder Years.
Her sister was on the Wonder Years, who I wound up doing a movie with.
Yeah.
Called Seven Girlfriends. And her roommate, like years earlier, I had gone out with her roommate years earlier.
Yeah.
So we're all sort of acquainted. And so it was actually really fun to do it. But, I think there are scenes where I'm like at the asteroid penal colony, nuclear core, trying to dismantle something so it doesn't blow up. And there's a set where like blinking lines and sort of completely painted plywood panels and stuff like that. And I was walking around and Munich was like, "Say something." And I was walking around and go, "That looks real." And I think that's actually in the movie,
Yeah.
There are graphics that show the asteroid planet, and it really just looks like an oatmeal cookie against a painting of like a starry night. But we definitely, we had a good time. There was a lot of smoke. I remember the Atlanta. Made a movie about it recently. Do you remember there was like a bombing at the Olympics in Atlanta? Somebody set off like a nail bomb, and they thought the guy who discovered it was actually the bomber, but it wound up not being him.
Right. Yeah, I can't remember the name, but I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah. Anyway, so I feel like in the past couple of years, I run into Robert Munich every 6 months or so, and he's like a lovely human being. I've always been, while it may not be my favorite film, I wouldn't trade it for the world after having it get to work with him.
Tom Waits, who played the warden. Yeah, I interviewed him last year. He's an interesting guy. In Timelock.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, no, but not Tom.
Not the musician Tom Waits, but Thomas
right.
G. Waits. Yeah.
Yeah, I got confused there for a second. I guess I didn't really know his name. Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, Thomas G. Waits. Yeah.
And there was one scene we did that's on like the transport ship, where Jeff Speakman's character, where I have like a big fight scene with him. Mm-hmm. And he's like, he was like a major, like, what, like martial artist or, mixed martial arts artist person or something.
Yeah.
And there was this stunt double for the fight who was about 15 years older than me and like 2 inches taller than me. It was like a fight. They choreographed the fight and then they shot like Jeff Speakman's side of it.
Right.
And then I went over the fight with the guy because they were going to do my side of it, where I was like taking the blows, and this poor guy was like, he was sort of hunched over like somebody who had just run 15 miles. He's like, okay, so you're going to walk in, then he's going to like swing down, kick you in the head, and you gotta duck, man. You gotta really duck fast. If that thing catches you, I swear to God, it like really hurts. And then you're gonna swing for him. You miss, and then he's gonna do a side kick to your chest, and just like give yourself a little room. Make sure you like give yourself like a few inches so like he doesn't connect. Okay. Mm-hmm. This poor guy, and like clearly like the shit knocked out of him. I was like, okay, all right, I will definitely keep my distance.
That's awesome. So before quarantine happened, did you have any projects that got shelved?
Yeah, I actually, I work a lot doing theater, and I there's a director I've worked with. I'm super grateful to have worked with her a few times in the past couple of years. Named Lila Neugebauer, who actually has directed I think it's still untitled Jennifer Lawrence movie that she was going to just be finishing this spring. There were some reshoots that I guess have not happened yet because of the quarantine. But she's great theater director, and a playwright, Annie Baker, and I've done a couple of her plays. And back in January, I got offered to do a play of hers called The Antipodes for the Mark Taper Forum, which is one of the big theaters in Los Angeles. And so I was working on this like great kind of dream project. This Annie Baker play with Lila directing it. And we were actually rehearsing in New York because most of the cast was there, and as well as the director and the writer. I guess it's more economical to rehearse there and then just send a couple of us to New York and put us up for rehearsals rather than bringing 10 people out and housing them in LA.
Yeah.
And we were just days away from moving rehearsals
Right.
15th, and it was the 15th. And yeah, so I hadn't had anything planned after that, but you know, that was I mean, you know, even now, like back then, I back in March, I felt like, oh, this is just terrible luck, and I had this moment, you know, of feeling like it was my luck.
Yeah.
And then, you know, realizing, like, well, wait a second, they're not just canceling this, they've closed all the Broadway theaters. Oh, everything is, like, every theater is shut down. Oh, wait a minute, all, like, film and television production is shut down.
Yep.
And then, you know, and then you start understanding, like, oh my God, you know, thousands of people are catching this disease. And then it's like, oh no, thousands of people are like dying from this disease. And, you know, after a while you stop feeling like it's, you know, oh no, this happened to me. But, oh no, this is a thing that we're going through, all of us together.
Yeah. Are you worried about the future of theater?
I am. I mean, I guess I would say, yeah, I'm worried about the theater because I don't know, you know, I feel like eventually, you know, my sense is eventually we will have this virus under control enough that people will feel comfortable, you know, congregating in a closed building and sitting, you know, shoulder to shoulder, and watching a play, and that it'll be, you know, safe enough for actors to, you know, do scenes with one another where they're, you know, talking and shouting and singing and touching each other and kissing, and, you know, I don't think I've ever done a play where at a certain point, you know, there's not spittle coming out because, you know, you're talking, you're trying to make precise sounds with your speech, and you're speaking it loud enough so that it can be heard in a giant room. And so eventually I think it's going to be okay to do that again, but I don't know if it's going to be any time in the next couple of years.
I know.
So I really don't know. You know, I feel like we're pretty, you know, resilient creatures and intrepid and we continue to evolve new technologies, and I have a lot of faith in people to come up with some answers here and to evolve new forms of entertainment, and I do not know what they are right now.
Yeah.
And until we know what we're doing, I'm not sure what a lot of us are going to do. So it's a dilemma, isn't it?
It is. It's a major dilemma.
Podcasting seems like a very good idea right now. But hats off to you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So many people have been available ever since this happened, and there's certain people, they just can't bring themselves to doing it because they're so depressed, you know. But I just feel like I have, you know, this great gift from God that I get to do this, you know.
Yeah.
I feel so blessed.
Yeah. Well, you know, we definitely, you know, we all want to hear the sound of the human voice. You know, we all want to know what's going on with other people, and either learn things or have our sense of reality affirmed by, you know, people sort of validating what we know to be true. And, I listen to, you know, I mean, I've got a little, starting to get a little dependency issue that I've got to work out, because I now listen to podcasts, in addition to listening to them throughout the day. I now listen to podcasts to, like, fall asleep. You know, if it's just quiet, I find myself too unproductively ruminating on what's going to be.
Yep.
And I tell you, if I felt like I was making any, you know, if I was coming up with any good ideas, I'd focus on it. But it's not, it's that anxiety, you know, worry that you were talking about, or depressed. I get it, you know. So, you know, and I can't listen to anything. You know, I can't listen to anything and fall asleep. If it's, you know, if it's the day's news kind of stories,
yeah,
I would stay up all night. So, I seek out either podcasts or, like, audiobooks that are of a historical nature.
right.
So it may not be, like, a particularly pressing issue, but I can listen to for a while, and I'll take my mind off of things, and I can fall asleep. But I'm grateful for them, I'll tell you that much.
Mm-hmm. I sure am too. I've learned so much about life just from listening to podcasts the last 5 years, and I'm just blessed that I get to do this. One last thing I wanted to ask you is, did you get to participate in the Blu-ray for Just One of the Guys?
Yeah, you know, that was like one of the last things I did before I went off to New York to work on the play.
Mm-hmm.
Is we did a Joyce and Joyce Heiser, Clayton Rohner, Tony Hudson,
mm-hmm.
John Apicella, who plays the coach.
Right.
Geez, I hope I'm not missing anybody. We went down to a little sound studio where they screened the film, and we all sat there and did the commentary. And I guess the Blu-ray did pretty well. But they, you know, whatever the initial release was, I had heard that Tony Hudson sent out a message to all of us that she'd heard that the Blu-ray was released, and that you know, within a couple of days they all sold out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I believe they're making more.
Yeah, that just because I talked to Field Steel a couple of months ago, and he was telling me about it and stuff. Yeah, I think it's great that it's finally on Blu-ray and it's going to get a commentary track and everything.
Yeah, Field Steel's great. I loved working with him.
Yeah, he mentioned that he and you got along great, and you know, he told me the story about how, you know, Willie and Phil were almost horror nerds.
Yes, right.
Yeah, which Jeff Franklin ended up putting in his next script, Summer School.
Oh, really? I didn't know. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. I got it right away when he told me that, too. I was like, oh, Chainsaw and Dave in Summer School. They're the horror nerds.
Oh, it's so funny. God, but it's so different.
Yeah. But it worked out best. So
yeah.
I hope after this whole pandemic is over, you get to go back to work and stuff, because the world needs content and it needs great actors such as yourself, Arye.
Oh, thanks, Tommy. I appreciate that. I hope so too. And um, and I hope that in addition to this disease like stopping its destruction, that also just sort of as a society we come back to being a little kinder to each other. It's crazy out there.
Very well said, Ari. Thank you so much for coming back on again, and you have yourself a great day and stay safe.
Thanks, Tommy. You too.
Okay.
You too.
Okay.
Good to talk to you.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Well, there you have it. Arye Gross. He's just the nicest guy and just the greatest storyteller. I love talking to him. Great guy. I love him. If you like this video, everyone, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, add me as a friend on Facebook, join my Tommy Kovac comedian page on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and all that fun stuff. Well, that's all the time we have this week on Splat from the Past. Till next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying, there's no shame in living in the past, because the present sucks. Later, dudes.